So this story sort of begins, the frustration that led to the creation of this website was I worked as a freelancer and reporter for various news websites in San Diego, and the most recent one was in Imperial Beach, and I created a patch website there for over the course of a little over 3 years. And it was, for me, proof that small communities deserve coverage. This is a city of a little bit less than 30,000 people. It's the last city on the border to Mexico. It has the most trafficked helicopter base on the West Coast. The Border Patrol is there. A lot of Navy SEALs, a lot of people trying to smuggle stuff across the border. One of the most important flyways for birds on the West Coast of the United States. And an interesting city government and whatnot. So what would happen frequently with news websites that I worked for is you'd walk in one day and they'd be like, hey, we're out of cash. And everything stops. And this felt like almost if you're a reporter who has irons in the fire all the time, this felt sort of like a betrayal because there were people who were left on the ledge. And so that frustration, most recently in Imperial Beach is what led to the creation of Through the Cracks in 2014. We launched a minimally viable product, AKA a Tumblr page, in 2014. Throughcracks.com launched in 2015, a year ago, and we've reported a little bit more than 200 stories of people bringing reporting and storytelling to life with crowdfunding in more than 40 countries around the world. And we have several contributors in various parts of the world that help us do that. Carlos Moreno is our co-founder. He lives between San Diego and Tijuana. He's also a photographer. Alexandra is in Bolivia. She's a photographer. Robert's also in San Diego. Jenna's in California. Whitney Helm is a reporter for, I believe, the Beloit Daily News in Wisconsin. Melissa works in California. Joe Proudman is a video producer for UC California Davis and has a couple of video projects on the side. And Sophia Montoya helps us with reporting and helped us create our page in Spanish recently so that we can share more of our work with a Spanish-speaking audience. Natasha Cox is in London. She works for, she's a producer there and has done work for BBC and Channel 4. Ekaterina is in Georgia, and she helps us cover issues in parts of the Russian-speaking world. So, just so the general basis of what I'm going over today is the different ways that crowdfunding has been used as a tool. And this first one is emerging.us. This is a campaign that's happening now. They're trying to raise $1 million to tell more stories of sort of the modern identity in the United States. Trying to get past the single narrative and the broadening of what it means to be American. Let's see here. This is the Ferret. Well, these are ferrets. This is not the Ferret. The Ferret is a news collective in Scotland of 4 to 5 investigative journalists. And they had a project last summer where they allowed their members to vote on which story they would cover once a month. They'll cover one story intensely once a month. And the members were able to choose that, and they funded it with crowdfunding. This is also, as you can see in the membership approach, trying to put them into the funnel of a more sustainable membership model instead of a single campaign. Bring the collectives together. This is the Boreal Collective, a photo group in parts of North America. They crowdfunded to hold their conference, I believe, in Canada last year. This one's really interesting. This is Tim Matsui made a documentary, I believe, in 2014. And So the documentary comes out, wins awards on sex trafficking and sex slavery in the United States. A year and a half after it comes out, he makes a crowdfunding campaign to send out more copies of the documentary as sort of a public service to more people who are working in this space in different parts of the country, and for him to, I believe, do more speaking tours around it as well. It was basically reviving what he'd already done and, putting it out more into the world. I think he had spoken with some of the sources that he had at the time and felt that there was more work to be done. Readers Choose. There's two different news websites that come to mind. Asheville Blade in North Carolina and then voicessandiego.org are both doing, their approach is, we will increase in size when our readers choose that we need more reporters. So if you want us to go cover City Hall more, this is the amount of money that we need to do that. If you want us to add another person who only investigates housing in San Diego or the other issues that they want to focus on, this is how we're going to do that. And they have different approaches in how they go about that. Voices San Diego tries to reach out to more of their affluent supporters in this, and Asheville Blade is on Patreon. But it's the same approach. They grow when readers decide. Engagement, bland photo, but the Bellingcat is a website in Britain. You may have heard of it. It's basically, how would you describe it? It's like crowdsourced war zone forensics. People sit at home and investigate things that are happening in various war zones. Syria and the Ukraine are what they focused on mostly. This specific campaign took about an hour, and the pictures that were purchased were it was satellite images to verify things around I think it was the MH17 Malaysian Airlines airliner that was shot down in the Ukraine. And so this group of people working in various parts of the world were basically challenging the Russian army with a $800 GoFundMe campaign. The results of their investigation were shared by, I believe, CNBC, not CNBC, was it Reuters? Reuters published it. A couple of other outlets published it. Basically, international news outlets were picking up the work that they were doing. Bellingcat has also been cited in international courts, and this was an example of the engagement that they were able to do around a single campaign to sort of rally their supporters together. Another example of engagement, this is Boston. It's just, art. Muck Rock in Boston uses crowdfunding to bring particular stories together. So Muck Rock focuses on FOIA requests or public records requests, and people can do it collectively on their platform. And so part of what they're doing now is allowing for, once something does receive the money that it needs in order for the data or whatever it was that they wanted out of a public records request to be done, then they can assign it to a reporter. And so that's what they're doing now. But the engagement part that I was going to mention is, I believe there was an investigation around the Boston Olympics last year, and various news outlets used the Muck Rock platform to together demand public records from the city of Boston, so that they were, they were eventually successful, but it was a collective action for public records requests. This is the founder of Word Rates, Scott Carney, and it's a website that tries to bring together freelancing journalists to understand what rates editors pay and what it's like to work with them. It's like Yelp for freelancers. And so he doesn't like crowdfunding, but he did a crowdfunding campaign anyway in order to find his initial users for the platform. And I believe he has a couple hundred people on it now, and they launched a couple months ago. To re-engage users. An NPR station, I'd have to go back and figure this out, but an NPR station, this is their YouTube viewership before and after a crowdfunding campaign. To help the community. Santa Rosa Press Democrat working with a credit union in Northern California used a crowdfunding campaign to help people who were affected by, I believe it was the Lake County fire this last summer. They raised a couple $100,000. I want to say $1 million, but I don't recall. It might have been less, but they raised it really fast, and it was using their, really taking a hold of the amount of attention that they get in the first place and the proactive community members who might be reading their publication in order to quickly bring some support to people who need it. Another example of this was in Manchester, England. A puppy mill burned down, and it was a case of arson, and 50 dogs died, and they live blogged, the local paper live blogged the event. And in the morning, they started a crowdfunding campaign. And I believe they had £1 million by the, within about 24 hours. These are black and white occasions. Obviously, a news outlet that decides to crowdfund something that's a bit more in the gray area might be a bit different. Kraut reporter and day correspondent in Germany and in Holland used crowdfunding in 2013 and 2013 and 2014 to start news startups. Important thing to mention here, none of it existed before they started with the idea. They brought the idea to the public. Now, some of them were nationally recognized journalists. So that makes sense that they would have some traction, but there was no previous drafts or anything. They presented a vision, and they were able to build on that. And this is obviously before like AdBlock had a community of like 200 million people using their product, but they presented it by saying, we want money from you so that we have no influence from advertisers. We are beholden only to you. And we use the various platforms to communicate with our audience to decide what to report. Both of them raised €1 million or more. In the case of Day Correspondent, they raised it in less than a week. So that's it. I thought I was going to go overtime. Like it's
not good.
Hot dog.
Right?
Yeah.
20 minutes is a long time,
Yeah.
isn't it?
I usually go over. So
let's questions for Khari about crowdfunding. It seems like the amazing thing is, and we worry a lot about funding for good journalism, and it seems like if you hit the right story at the right time and you make the right ask, you can get a huge following in a short amount of time.
I mean, it's possible. I think that the person's, or a publication's ability to rally that depends on serving a need, finding a pain point for your users, and your actual audience can determine how much money you're able to bring in. But yeah, certainly.
So it seems like every day there's a new way to do this. How often do you come across something that you haven't seen before in this industry, I guess we can call it?
I don't know. I think Emerging US is a really interesting campaign that's happening now. And it's the idea behind it being, that there's a broader definition of who we are as a country than what we're generally shown. And their entire purpose is to bring underreported stories to light. And that's certainly why we exist. And so, I mean, that's probably the most recent one. But maybe a couple times a month. I think when you go into the other platforms that aren't Kickstarter, and it's really dangerous to think of crowdfunding only being Kickstarter. If you look at the platforms outside of Kickstarter and standout campaigns that took place in 2015, they exceed the amount of money that was made on Kickstarter between 2009 and 2015 for journalism. But you have to go find that. And that's not a story that you're going to find if you only look at that single platform. And none of the platforms tell you the story. They're focused on their own game. So that's what we try to bring together on the website, is the innovation and that's happening at the edges on various crowdfunding platforms. A lot of campaigns aren't successful, but I think the ones that find the formula to really get at it and focus on solving something for their readers do the best.
Has there been any abuse of this, like there have in the other crowdfunding operations, movies and other things where, it's kind of gambling? Has anybody tried to take advantage of it in the journalism area?
Not that I've seen. We're moving quickly in our reporting. If we had more time, one of the things that I think that we certainly want to do in 2016 is take more time to look back at what has worked and what hasn't. One of the things that happened a couple weeks ago, this is not an abuse, just generally saying, just changes in what the original plan was. A website called Femsplain to explain feminism stuff shut down, and they stopped creating content, and they've changed to basically allow for like newsletter and then a Slack community to focus around their topic and to continue have some kind of community. That's different than what their original campaign intended, and they sort of fulfilled the role of that initially. There's statistics to say that the more money a campaign makes, the more often that it will deliver late the promises on the campaign. So not really in journalism. I know that the federal government and regulators are starting to look more at crowdfunding campaigns to see when people are not fulfilling promises made.
And you play the role of facilitator with some of these projects. I mean, tell me about how Through the Cracks helps with this, and how people who might be watching on our live stream or sitting in the room might be able to work with you in a collaborative way.
We don't do a lot of that yet. I think that's something that we want to do further down the road, and I think that there are products and services that we can create to better help freelance journal. I mean, one of the things we wrote an article that was sort of not negative on the Pew Research piece on crowdfunding and journalism, but just to point out that if you only look at Kickstarter, it's a big mistake. But it's we want to do more helping people with preparing for campaigns, because, and I know as somebody who's ran various news startups, you have no time. You don't have time to do that. And so if you tell somebody, look, a crowdfunding campaign is like having a full-time job, and want another full-time job on top of your 1.5 times full-time job, that's not good. So I think that there's space to help more freelance journalists and to make tools that approximate based on data, what kind of success you might be able to have. And that's something that we definitely want to do more in the future.
Khari Johnson, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.